The night the fires came, the sky over the San Pedro Valley burned the color of dying coals. The riders had come before dawn, blue coats from Fort Huachuca, chasing the band of Choconan Apaches who'd lifted cattle from the bar spread. By sunup, the raiders were scattered, their ponies shot from under them, their tracks washing out in the morning rain. Taz's daughter Naylin had never known fear before that morning. She was 20 summers old, proud and swift, her hair black as obsidian and her eyes as watchful as a hawk's. But when she saw her brother fall beside the river, his rifle clattering into the shallows, something inside her went still. She turned her pony toward the mesa and rode hard, not looking back at the smoke curling from the willows. For 2 days she rode without food, drinking only from the muddy creeks and hiding from patrols that combed the valley. Her moccasins wore through, and her pony went lame. When she came upon a small line camp, a shack beside a windmill, the kind cowboys used when working cattle far from town, she was too weak to do more than slide from her horse. The place was empty. A single corral, a few tools, and a weather-beaten cabin with a door that hung crooked on its hinge. Inside smelled of leather, tobacco, and loneliness. She could tell by the marks on the wall that a man lived here alone, a cowboy. Probably, judging from the saddle oil and lariat, she should have left, but the sky was gray again, promising more rain, and the ache in her stomach spoke louder than her pride. She found dried beans in a tin and ate a handful raw, then searched for a hiding place in case the man returned. That's when she saw the wardrobe. It was big and rough-hewn, built from pine boards, probably hauled in by wagon years ago. Its doors were cracked, and one hinge creaked when she touched it. Inside hung a few shirts, a long duster, and a smell of dust and sweat, the scent of someone who'd lived too long under the sun. She climbed inside, pressing her back to the boards, and waited. When the cowboy came, it was near sunset. She heard his boots first, heavy and dragging. He cursed the rain, stomped the mud from his spurs, and lit a lamp, threw a sliver of light between the doors. She saw him tall, with a rough beard and eyes pale as riverstone. His hat dripped water, and his shoulders looked weighted with miles of riding. He was not young, maybe 30, maybe more, the kind of man the frontier carved out of loneliness and stubbornness. He cooked beans, sang a half-forgotten song under his breath, then sat at the table and wrote something in a small book. From her hiding place, Naylin watched every movement, how he bowed his head before eating, how he laid his pistol by his right hand even while reading, how the silence of the plains seemed to sit easy on him. When he finally undressed, hanging his shirt back in the wardrobe, her breath caught. The door shuddered, and for a moment she thought he'd see her, but he didn't. He just muttered, "Reckon tomorrow's another lonesome one," and blew out the lamp. In the dark, she could hear the slow rhythm of his breathing. The storm passed outside, wind hissing through the cracks. She waited until she was sure he was asleep before easing the door open enough to breathe. She meant to leave by dawn, but something, maybe exhaustion, maybe the strange safety she felt near that man's quiet, kept her there when morning came. And as the sun crept over the ridge, painting the desert gold, the Apache woman in the wardrobe stayed hidden, and began to learn the secrets of a cowboy's heart. By the second morning, Naylin had learned the rhythm of the cowboy's life. He rose before the sun, lit the stove, and boiled coffee that smelled like burnt dreams. Then he'd strap on his colt, pull on his hat, and step outside to tend his herd. A small scatter of longhorns grazing near the wash. He'd be gone for hours, leaving the cabin silent except for the creak of the windmill and the hum of flies. Those were the hours when Naylin crept from her hiding place. She moved quietly, every motion trained by years of living in the wild. She found his store's flour, jerky, coffee, a little sugar. She took only what she needed and replaced it carefully. When she dared, she opened his book. It wasn't a Bible, as she first thought, but a journal. The writing was rough but steady, the words plain and lonely. His name was Luke Tanner. He wrote about dust storms, cattle drives, and the ache of being the last man at a dead ranch. Between the lines, Naylin read a different story, one of loss. There were mentions of a woman named Sarah and a baby that never came to live. The writing grew darker after that, like a river drying in summer heat. By the third day, she found herself studying more than his words. She began to listen for the way his boots sounded when he returned, the little whistle he used to call his horse, the tired sigh when he set down his hat. Each night she hid again before he came in. Each night she watched through that narrow crack in the wardrobe. Luke would cook, sometimes sing. He talked to himself the way men do when they've been too long alone. "Ain't much out there but coyotes and ghosts," he'd mutter. "Guess I'm both." He'd patch his clothes by lamplight, read an old newspaper until his eyes burned, then sit in silence, staring at the fire. Nayland could see the pain in his posture, the kind of quiet that comes when a man's spirit has no one left to talk to. And yet, there was something gentle in him, in the way he poured water for his horse before himself, or how he rescued a wounded hawk one afternoon, binding its wing with a strip of his own shirt. From her shadowed refuge, Nayland felt her fear shift into something else. Curiosity, maybe. Respect. The lines that divided enemy and man began to blur. One night, while he was asleep, she stepped fully from the wardrobe for the first time. The fire had burned low, painting everything in gold and red. She moved to the table where his journal lay open. Her fingers brushed the words. "If the world's got mercy left, maybe it'll send me something worth keeping." She stared at that sentence a long time. The next morning, she almost made a mistake. Luke had returned early from the range, just as she was slipping back into hiding. The door of the wardrobe thudded softly behind her, but his boots paused. He sniffed the air. "Huh," he said aloud. "Thought I left that coffee can closed." Her heart hammered. She could hear him moving closer, then opening the window to let in light. His shadow passed over the wardrobe doors. "Reckon I'm going crazy," he muttered finally. "Smells like sage and wood smoke in here." It was the scent of her hair, the Apache scent that no rain could wash away. For the rest of that day, he moved differently. Slower, watching corners, listening. Once, she saw him lift his rifle and check the room as if expecting company. But when the sun went down and no one came, Luke laughed softly to himself. "Ghosts, that's all. Ain't nobody out here but me and the wind." Nayland, hidden in the dark, almost smiled. For a week she lived like that, half spirit, half woman, learning every small truth about the man whose house she'd stolen. She learned he dreamed in words, not cries. She learned he could mend anything but his own heart. And on the 7th day, when he left the door open a crack before riding out, she stood in the light for the first time, breathing his air without fear. But she didn't yet know the world outside was coming for both of them. It was a morning like any other, with the sun spilling over the jagged mesas and painting the desert gold. Luke Tanner had saddled his horse, checked the fences, and counted his longhorns. All seemed ordinary, quiet as the plains themselves. But inside, a storm waited to break. Nayland had grown bold. For the first time, she moved freely around the cabin, taking note of everything, the grooves on the table where his knife rested, the smudges on the walls from years of leaning against them, the careful stacking of wood beside the stove. She even tried to read aloud one of his journal entries, though she barely recognized the English words. The cabin smelled of coffee and smoke. She lingered near the stove, feeling the warmth on her skin, when she heard it, the creak of the floorboards behind her. She froze. Luke Tanner's voice cut through the morning air, calm, but firm. Nayland, her heart leaped. How did he know her name? He stepped into the room, eyes scanning, hand resting on the butt of his Colt. Nayland tried to retreat, but the wardrobe, her refuge for days, was too far. She was trapped in the open now, the sun falling across her face, revealing dark eyes wide with fear. Luke paused, tilting his head. "Well, I'll be damned." His voice held no anger, only astonishment. "You've been in my wardrobe all this time." She opened her mouth, but no words came. He studied her for a long moment, the silence stretching as thick as the desert heat. Then he sighed. "Guess I ought to thank you for not stealing my boots too." Nayland's lips quivered. She wanted to explain, to tell him why she was here, why she had risked everything to hide, but the words tangled inside her throat. Luke shook his head slowly. "I reckon you've got a lot of courage. Or foolishness. Could be both?" He moved closer, careful, his hand hovering near the gun but not touching it. "Why hide? You don't look like you belong in my wardrobe, that's for sure." The world outside pressed against the windows, the wind stirring dust, the cattle lowing, the endless plains stretching beyond the horizon. Nayland felt the weight of it all. Her people, her family lost to violence. And now this man who looked at her not with hate, but with curiosity. I ran," she said finally, her voice trembling. "From soldiers. From them. I had nowhere else to go." Luke nodded, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Soldiers, huh? Don't surprise me. This country's full of 'em." He lowered his hand and pulled up a chair. "Sit, we'll figure this out. Ain't much point in hiding anymore." Her eyes widened. Sit, she had never sat down with a white man alone before, but something about his tone, patient, measured, almost gentle, coaxed her into obedience. The hours passed in cautious conversation. She learned that his name was Luke Tanner, that he'd lost his family years ago, and that he ran this small ranch alone because the world had a way of taking everything from a man if he let it. She didn't tell him who she truly was. At least not yet, only that she had been fleeing and needed refuge. Luke listened more than he spoke. And yet, in his pauses, Naylin began to see him, a man shaped by hardship, yet capable of empathy. She realized that he had been watching her too, understanding more than she imagined. "You've been clever," he said finally, breaking the silence, "hiding right under my nose. And I never suspected, not once." He leaned back, his eyes searching hers. "But clever or not, you're not safe. Not in my wardrobe. Not here." Fear washed over her again, but it was tempered by a spark of trust. Luke didn't move to drive her away. Instead, he offered something unexpected: protection. The days that followed were different. She no longer hid. She helped him with chores, learned how he managed the cattle, and observed the rhythms of his life openly. Yet a tension lingered, both of them aware that outside forces could strike at any moment. Soldiers, rustlers, or worse, could descend on the remote cabin with little warning. One night, as the wind whistled through the cracks in the cabin walls, Luke spoke again. "You stay, if you want. Ain't much comfort I can offer, but you'll be safe here, for now." And Naylin realized that the wardrobe had not just been a hiding place, it had been a window, a way to see him, to understand him, and perhaps, in some strange, quiet way, to find a sliver of hope. But hope in the West was a fragile thing, and soon, both of them would face a test that neither could hide from. The morning broke crisp over the San Pedro Valley, the sun cutting through a thin haze of dust that clung to the desert like a shroud. For the first time in days, Naylin stepped outside without hiding, feeling the chill bite her bare arms. Luke Tanner stood near the corral, reins in hand, watching the cattle graze. "Morning," he said gruffly, though there was no edge in his voice. "Morning," she replied, still cautious, still unsure. She had been taught to trust no one outside her people, but something about the way Luke moved, slow, deliberate, respectful, kept her from fleeing. He handed her a halter. "Help me with the longhorns. They need counting." It was the first time she touched the animals under his direction. Their hides were rough, their eyes wary, but Naylin moved with a grace born of the open plains. She guided them through the corral, whispered to the stubborn ones, and noticed how Luke watched her, almost silently, as if measuring the rhythm of her heart as carefully as the herd. By midday, they were working side by side, and something unspoken began to form a fragile trust. "You're good with them," Luke admitted, tipping his hat back to wipe sweat from his brow. "Never seen a woman handle cattle like that?" Naylin shrugged, not used to praise, but something warmed inside her. "I know the land. I know the animals. You must know your own heart to know theirs." He laughed softly, a sound that startled her because it carried no mockery. "Ain't sure my heart's worth knowing." The days passed in a rhythm that was almost peaceful. Tending cattle, mending fences, gathering firewood. Naylin learned the tricks of a solitary cowboy's life. How to read the wind for signs of predators, how to conserve water, how to track not just animals but men who might be coming from the fort or the hills. And in turn, Luke watched her. He saw how she moved, how her eyes missed nothing, how the smallest shift in a steer's stance could warn of danger. He respected her silence, her caution, and slowly, the walls around him, built from years of loss and solitude, began to crumble. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mesas and the sky turned molten gold, they sat by the fire. Luke offered her a tin of beans. "Eat," he said. "You've earned it." Naylin took it, surprised by the gesture. She ate slowly, letting the warmth fill the emptiness inside her belly. Then she spoke, her voice low. "I've been watching you all these days. I know things about you you don't even know I've seen." He frowned. "Like what?" "The way you carry your grief in your hands, not your eyes. The way you talk to the fire when the world's too quiet. The way you hope, even if you won't admit it." Luke's jaw tightened. He looked into the fire, then back at her. "You've got a sharp eye, Apache girl. But don't mistake knowing me for knowing the world. It's a cruel place." She met his gaze. "And yet here you survive it." "So do I for the first time." Luke nodded. There was no argument in him, only recognition, a shared understanding of the land, of danger, of loss, and perhaps, most importantly, a mutual respect that neither of them had expected. Days turned into a week. They worked together, ate together, and when the night was quiet, they sat and watched the stars, letting the vastness of the desert absorb their fears. Naylin began to trust him, and he began, cautiously, to trust her. Yet the West was never truly safe. Rumors of a patrol from the fort, a gang of rustlers in the hills, and the unending threat of nature itself loomed like a shadow over the cabin. Both knew that this fragile peace could be shattered with a single misstep. One night, after the fire had burned low, Luke handed her a rifle. "If anything comes, you know how to use it. I won't tell you twice." Nayland took it, the weight of the weapon both familiar and strange in her hands. "And if I have to?" she asked. "You survive," he said. "Like I do. Together, maybe we got a better chance." And in that moment, as the stars shimmered above the silent desert, they both realized something. Survival wasn't just about hiding or fighting, it was about trust. And for the first time, each had found a companion to share the long, lonely plains. But the desert keeps no secrets for long. Trouble was coming, not the slow, creeping kind, but fast, violent, and certain. And when it arrived, both Luke and Nayland would have to face it, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as something stronger, bound by the harshness of the West and the fragile trust they had forged. The desert air was heavy that morning, the wind carrying a scent of rain and something darker, smoke from a distant fire, or trouble on the trail. Luke Tanner rode the ridge, scanning the horizon, when he saw them. 3 riders, their hats low, dust swirling around their horses. Rustlers, he guessed, by the swagger of their mounts and the glint of revolvers at their hips. He spurred his horse back toward the cabin, his mind working fast. Nayland had been helping with the cattle, unaware of the approach. The animals were restless, snorting and shifting, sensing danger the way only longhorns could. He called as he neared the cabin. She looked up from the corral, eyes wide with understanding. Without a word, she grabbed her rifle from the rack inside. The riders came closer, shouting, laughing, their voices carrying across the valley. They didn't know the land as Luke did, didn't know the hidden gullies or the ridgelines where one could vanish from sight. But they had numbers, and that alone made them dangerous. Luke and Nayland worked together seamlessly. He positioned the longhorns in the narrow passage between the cabin and the bluff, forcing the riders to slow. Nayland crouched behind the corral fence, rifle steady in her hands. The wind whipped her hair across her face. But she didn't flinch. The first rider reached the gate and dismounted, sneering. Well, looks like a couple of lost souls out here," he jeered, waving a gun. Luke stepped out from behind a boulder, revolver raised. "Ain't lost, just ready." Shots rang out, echoing across the valley. Dust rose from hooves as the longhorns stamped, scattering the rustlers. Nayland fired once, then again, her aim true. The first rider fell from his horse, clutching his shoulder. The second tried to circle around, but Luke intercepted him with a burst of gunfire. Horses screamed, hooves pounding the ground. The fight was brutal, messy, and short, the kind of violence the desert knew well. When the dust settled, the riders had fled, leaving behind a wounded horse and a few scattered belongings. Luke and Nayland stood in the settling dust, chests heaving, hearts still racing. "You're a natural," Luke said finally, his voice low. There was no boast, only awe. Not many could hold their own like that. Nayland's hands shook, not from fear, but from adrenaline. "We survived," she said simply. He nodded. "Together." The danger passed, but the storm wasn't over. Clouds gathered in the west, and a thunderhead rolled over the mesas, dark and threatening. Rain began to fall, first in a drizzle, then in sheets, pounding the roof of the cabin, turning the ground to mud. They worked quickly, securing the cabin, stacking wood, and checking the fences. Nayland helped with the animals, her skills proving invaluable. Together, they moved like one being, anticipating each other's needs, covering each other's weaknesses. As night fell, they sat by the fire, wet clothes clinging to their skin, and listened to the wind howl through the cracks in the cabin. For the first time, they allowed themselves to speak of things other than survival. "You fought well today," Luke said, breaking the silence. "Better than most men I've known." Nayland looked into the fire. "I learned from watching," she said, "and from surviving." Luke nodded, understanding more than she realized. "We'll need more than guns and horses if this keeps up," he said. "The world's closing in. Soldiers, rustlers, the law. They all want what's ours, one way or another." Nayland's eyes narrowed. "Then we hold it. Together." He smiled faintly. "Ain't many would risk themselves for a stranger. You're different." The storm outside raged on, thunder rolling over the valley, lightning splitting the sky. But inside the cabin, there was warmth, and something stronger than fear, trust, forged in the heat of bullets and mud. In the quiet understanding of two people who had chosen to survive together. For that night, at least, the West could wait. But tomorrow, the desert would demand more, and both of them knew it. The morning after the storm was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The wind had died down, leaving the desert sparkling under a pale, wary sun. The longhorns grazed in the wet grass, their breath forming misty clouds in the cool air. Luke Tanner moved among them, checking fences and tallying the herd. Naylin stayed close, carrying a bucket of water. But a weight pressed on her chest, the secret she had carried for so long. She had hidden in his wardrobe, observed his every move, stolen his food, read his journal, and yet she had never told him who she really was. Not just a fugitive, not just an Apache woman fleeing soldiers, but the daughter of a small band whose people had been slaughtered, a survivor, a witness to death. And now, after days of working alongside him, the lie had grown too heavy to carry. She waited until he had finished counting the cattle, until he leaned against the corral gate, wiping sweat from his brow. Then she spoke, voice barely above the wind. "Luke, I have to tell you something." He looked at her, calm but wary. "I reckon I suspected you had a story." "Go on." Naylin took a deep breath. "I'm not just a runaway girl. I am Apache. My people were attacked. My family, my tribe, most of them are gone. I've been hiding, surviving, because there's no one left to protect me." Luke's expression hardened, but not with anger. There was shock, yes, and a flicker of disbelief. Then a slow, measured nod. "You're serious," he said. "You've been living this whole time, right here, in front of me, and I never knew." "Yes," she whispered, eyes downcast. "I came to your cabin because I had nowhere else to go. I watched you, studied you, but I never meant to harm you." Luke was silent, and for a long moment, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Then he spoke, low and steady, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen loss but had not yet lost his heart. "You're lucky," he said finally. "Most men, most cowboys, would have shot you on sight, but I didn't. Maybe because I saw something in you. Maybe because, hell, I don't know why, but you're alive, and that matters." Naylin looked up, eyes glistening. You're not angry." Luke shook his head. "Angry. For surviving. For being smart enough to live another day in this world. No. I respect it, even if it makes me a fool for letting you stay." Relief surged in her chest, but it was mixed with fear. Would this change things? Could he trust her fully now that he knew the truth? He studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. "You stay, if you want, but we do things differently now. We face the world as it is. No hiding, no secrets." Naylin took his hand, feeling the roughness of his palm against hers. I want that," she said. "I want to survive, and if I can, I want to help you too." For the first time, they were equal partners in a harsh, unrelenting world. The trust between them had been tested by bullets, storms, and the quiet loneliness of the plains. But now it was cemented by truth as they worked together through the day, repairing fences damaged in the storm and tending to the animals. Naylin noticed a shift in Luke. He was no longer merely cautious, no longer the solitary man of the desert. He watched her with a new respect, one born not of curiosity but of recognition. She was a survivor, and perhaps, in this harsh land, a comrade worth keeping close. But the revelation also brought new dangers. Word of Apache survivors in the region could attract soldiers or bounty hunters. Rustlers might hear tales of a cabin guarded by two determined souls. The West, as always, was unforgiving, and peace would not last long. That night, by the fire, Luke and Naylin sat in silence, the weight of truth settling over them. "We've got each other," Luke said at last. "And for now, that's enough to face what comes next." Naylin nodded, staring into the flames. "We'll survive, together." And for the first time since she had fled her destroyed world, Naylin felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope, but the horizon was dark, and the desert promised trials yet to come. And neither of them could know that the next storm would test not just their survival, but the fragile bond that had begun to form between them. Dawn broke over the San Pedro Valley like a promise and a warning all at once. Mist clung to the canyon walls, and the chill in the air bit through worn shirts and leather vests. Luke Tanner mounted his horse, reins held loosely, eyes scanning the horizon. Beside him, Naylin adjusted her rifle, the weight familiar now, the wood worn smooth in her hands. They both knew what awaited them. Rumors from the fort had grown into certainty. A squad of soldiers, drawn by tales of Apache survivors and an outlawed cabin in the hills, was coming. There would be no hiding this time, no clever tricks in a wardrobe. They would have to ride out and meet danger head-on. "Ready?" Luke asked, voice calm but tense. Naylin nodded, gripping the saddle horn. "As ready as I'll ever be." The ride was swift and silent. Dust rose in muted clouds around their horses' hooves, the only sound the rhythmic pounding against the dry earth. The valley stretched endlessly before them, mesas rising like silent sentinels. Yet every shadow, every ridge, whispered danger. As they neared the ridge above the cabin, Luke held up a hand. "Wait here. Watch for movement. I'll draw their attention." Naelin's heart leaped, but she trusted him, and she trusted herself. She crouched behind a rock, scanning the valley floor for any sign of the approaching soldiers. Her sharp eyes caught glints of metal, the sudden motion of riders adjusting in their saddles. They were near, too near. Luke kicked his horse into the open, letting it thunder down the ridge. He raised his revolver and fired a warning shot, echoing through the valley like a clap of thunder. The soldiers spotted him instantly and surged forward, guns drawn. Shouting orders, Naelin fired twice from her hiding spot. The sound of the rifle splitting the air, and one soldier toppled. Others scattered, confused by the unexpected assault from multiple directions. She had learned to move silently, to shoot accurately, to anticipate. The West had taught her well. Luke circled, leading the soldiers into a trap he had spotted days ago. A narrow canyon where horses could barely pass and the longhorns could stamp them into submission. With careful planning, he and Naelin drove the soldiers' horses into the canyon. Chaos erupted. Men fell, horses reared. Dust and blood mingled in the heat of battle. Hours passed in a blur of smoke, shouts, and gunfire. By the time the sun hung high and hot, the attackers had fled, leaving behind only the echoes of their defeat. Luke and Naelin stood atop a ridge, surveying the valley below. Their bodies were bruised, hands raw, faces streaked with sweat and dust. Yet they had survived. Luke turned to Naelin. His eyes filled with something more than respect, a bond forged in fire, blood, and the unforgiving desert. "We did it," he said quietly. Together, Naelin nodded, finally allowing herself to breathe, to feel the relief washing through her. "We survived," she echoed. "And we'll keep surviving, Luke." Together, for the first time, the San Pedro Valley seemed to hold promise instead of danger. The longhorns grazed calmly in the distance. The wind whispered through the canyon walls, and the sun painted everything gold. They were alone, yet stronger for the battles they had faced. Stronger for the trust they had forged. In the days that followed, the cabin became more than a refuge. It was a home, a place where two survivors of different worlds had come together, sharing work, laughter, and even silence. Naelin taught Luke about tracking the subtle movements of the desert animals, the signs of approaching storms, and the ways to read the land with the intuition of her people. Luke shared his knowledge of the West, how to defend a homestead, manage a herd, and survive when the world seemed determined to crush anyone who dared stand against it. Together, they were unstoppable. Together, they became legends in the valley, whispers among travelers and cattle drivers of the Apache woman who rode beside the cowboy, both feared and respected for their courage and cunning. And though the West was wild, harsh, and relentless, they had learned its greatest lesson. Survival was not just about hiding or fighting, it was about trust, respect, and the bonds forged in fire and dust. As the sun dipped below the mesas, casting long shadows over the valley, Luke and Naelin rode side by side, the wind carrying their laughter across the plains. The wardrobe, the hiding, the storms, all of it had led to this moment. And in the heart of the untamed West, two survivors had found something rarer than gold. A partnership, a friendship, and perhaps, in time, something deeper. The West stretched before them, vast and untamed. But they were ready, and together, nothing could break them.